And good morning. Here we are at the virtual Moot House, and in our um, study in the Gospel of John, and you guys are all aware we're looking at the feeding of the multitude that took place in Galilee, and so we're going to just do a quick overview of that review, and then we're going to move on to verses 12 through 13, which is the aftermath of this amazing event. The background, of course, in 1 through 11 is Jesus and his disciples return to Galilee, and a really important detail that we really haven't dived into yet, but it's Passover time. There have been some comments about this. Number one, large crowd is approaching, and I'm applying that in our life to this approaching high demand, this feeling of demand that comes upon us when we start to feel overwhelmed by what is occurring. Number two, Jesus poses a where question to his disciples, to Philip and Andrew respond with what answers. And we've already looked at that. Number three, Jesus has everyone seated. And so that, I believe that was last week, we talked about quieting the demand in our lives. We discussed that. He then expresses gratitude for what is present, what he has, not what is not present. And I think I think that's what we talked about last week. And then it's followed by a free and abundant provision for all. And again, that was part of our discussion last week. So let's read. If somebody could either read from the screen or from the Bibles, let's read the whole chapter 6, 1 through 13, and then we'll pick up on verses 12 and 13 in a little more detail.
After these things, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, or Tiberias. A large crowd followed him because they saw the signs which he was performing on those who were sick. Then Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. Therefore Jesus, lifting up his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming to him, said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these may eat?" This he was saying to test him, for he himself knew what he was intending to do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, for everyone to receive a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are those for so many people?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, in number about 5,000. Jesus then took the loaves, and having given thanks, he distributed to those who were seated, likewise also of the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments, so that nothing will be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Dave, for reading that. And of course, I'm sure you've all heard that, 12 baskets full, not by accident, one for every disciple. So I've always kind of liked that. But we're going to go in. We're going to
one for every tribe.
There you go. Yeah, that's even another way of looking at it. So, well, the first thing I thought of as I was meditating on this week is when they were all filled, and this I'm going to ask you for your input here in a minute. But Jesus waits for all to be filled, and here's my comment. Jesus is never in a hurry. He patiently waits for what needs to happen. And I have, as I've aged, I've become more and more appreciative of this and have adopted it more, this type of thinking into my life. There are just certain things in our relationships that need to happen. And unless that happens, other things won't happen. And I've just learned that I'm learning that you just have to let some things go and let some things happen. So anyway, Jesus, in this case, he waits patiently for hunger to be satisfied. And, I've kind of opened it up a little bit here. I'd like to hear your thoughts. What are your thoughts in regard to this idea of Jesus waiting?
Well, it could have been a considerable period of time, because when you got 5,000 men and their families, and you're just trying to distribute the food around and then let them eat, it could be a while. So he had to be super patient.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Anybody that's gone to Promise Keepers knows that.
Yeah. Yeah, you get, the people that go through first, they may be ready for another meal by the time the last.
Yeah, right.
So
I was thinking from a personal basis is, if I am in a hurry and I want to solve something or do something or have a task or whatever, if I go and hurry, I tend to be, dependent upon myself. Rather, if I wait and I consult or maybe even meditate or pray about the issue, then I'm waiting on what I feel God is going to say to me. So for me, I need to follow that model, which I most of the time probably don't do.
yeah. What you said just kind of created a thought popped in my head is, Tatsi, is that remember the context here, in the context of Jesus's ministry all the time, is that he only does what he sees the Father doing. And that is really important, that what we see here happening in this story is the will of the Father, because Jesus only does what he sees the Father doing. And this waiting is, as I had stated, this waiting is becoming more and more important to me. I'm at my age, I'm just starting to get much more of a freedom for allowing things to happen, realizing there's not going to be any change until whatever has to happen happens. So
I think you're absolutely right, Mike. And Jesus being God incarnate, there's the saying that God is never early, he's never late, he's always just on time, which is really kind of a cool saying, but it's kind of a silly saying, because there is no time with God. God is eternal. He doesn't have a timeline. He doesn't have a schedule that he has to keep, or any of that kind of thing. So within the context of God moving in his own non-time,
whatever that is.
This is the same thing. This is the same thing that Jesus is doing. And let's face it, guys, to use a very temporal phrase, Jesus is no dummy. It's Passover, so there's all these extra people tending to gather as they come to Jerusalem and move towards the Passover. So he's a street preacher. He's got this audience now that he can preach to and teach to and minister to, but he also knows, if they're mumbling and grumbling and all the rest of that and hungry, they're not going to be listening to what he says. So he patiently gets them in a position where they'll be a listening audience. And that does require patience that most of us don't have, I think.
Yeah, Dave, I thought about that too, but then as I read through this some more, it doesn't appear to me that, at least in John's version, that Jesus is doing any teaching at this point. And what he, I think, is maybe doing is letting the act itself of feeding 5,000 men and however many women and children were there have the full impact that it was going to have. Because if you read down a couple more verses, it says that when they realized what had just happened, they were going to forcibly make him their king.
Yeah.
And he had to withdraw. So there really wasn't, it doesn't appear to me that there was any actual teaching done other than the feeding, and that he was letting this act have its full impact on the people.
Yeah, that's good, Joe.
Good point.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, let's,
Yeah, I was just going to say I've spent my whole life in a hurry. So the idea of slowing down or waiting is, I would always have agreed with you, but the reality of it in these last couple of years has really taken on different significance.
yeah. Good, thanks, John. Yeah. Well, and let's move on in verses 12 and 13. The next phrase to be underlined is he said to his disciples, when they were filled, he said to his disciples, gather up the leftovers fragments so that nothing will be lost. And I was, again, really enjoyed that meditation this week. Down below it says he gives the command to collect the leftovers so nothing is lost. So it's that nothing lost. Why do you think Jesus is concerned about nothing being lost? Jesus has unlimited resource, but yet he has concern about waste in this regard. What are your thoughts regarding that?
I think for me, it's, this young man, this young boy sacrificed his lunch to help out what Jesus was doing. And I think Jesus wanted to kind of recognize that he doesn't let our sacrifices go to waste. So he uses them fully.
Yeah.
I would just say, Mike, I got a little note that I wrote years ago that Jesus has always been concerned about the lost, right? The 99. His focus was on the lost and finding them. But
I find it so interesting because, again, well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. So 12 and 13, now 13. The filled, here's where we'll go. Filled the 12 baskets. They collected 12 baskets of leftovers. And the crowd was filled. This is what I was going to say. The crowd was filled, and then 12 baskets were filled. There's a double filling here. The people were filled, but yet, Jesus, because of who he is, he would certainly have the just in time, just the right amount that nothing would be left over. All the people were filled and nothing was left over. I could see it read like that, but it doesn't read like that. It reads that the people were filled and yet they had leftovers. And my comment there is, I just find that so interesting. That again, Jesus representing the will of the Father, it's just like filling upon filling.
There is always more of him.
Yeah.
Mike, I'm just wondering if maybe it's like underlining the significance of the miracle and just letting it kind of settle in that, man, there's maybe 10, 15,000 people that were fed, yet even had some leftovers.
Yeah.
In case anybody else.
Yeah.
In case somebody else walked up.
Yeah. And, you know, what I was pondering on, what's so interesting is, why is that so hard for me to get that through my head? That in the kingdom of God, there is just abundance upon abundance there for us. Well, everything in the story is about, and in concert with what we have read thus far in John's gospel account. And I could point to detail after detail, but everything about this gospel account thus far is pointing to abundance of provision. You know, starting way back, chapter 2, the turning the water into wine. Abundance of provision. And Jesus is demonstrating the will of the Father time and time again with this abundance of provision. However, as you and I experience the world around us every day, what we see is something quite different, and that is a lack in apparent resource. And so I've shown this graphically on the screen by transposing the one over the other, whereas in the kingdom economy, the kingdom that Jesus is demonstrating through the incarnation, there is an abundance of provision. But yet, in our experience, and I believe it's not far off from the experience of the two disciples in their response, and you know, how are we going to do this, is I see lack of resource. So what I'd like to do is, these two have transposed on each other. They create a garbled up mess. I don't have the answer to this, but I think it'd be fun to kind of ponder this for a while. So what I'd like us to do, it's 7:30, we're right on time, is go to our groups, and this is where you want to snap the picture for the question. And let's go to our breakout rooms and talk about this disparity that you see, abundance of provision, but yet lack of resource on the other hand. And what are your, how do you respond to this? How do you respond to this disparity that we see? And so we'll go about 20 minutes and then come back, maybe 15, and then we'll come back, because I think we'd all like to hear your comments from your breakout room. So I'll do that now. Whoop, I just stopped share.